"I'm so glad you could make it," the new fiancé said, her voice a little too sweet as she held her new baby. She gave the ex-wife a look of pity, who was standing at the entrance to the lavish birthday party the wealthy ex-husband watched from nearby, a smirk on his face. He had invited his childless ex-wife to show her exactly what she'd lost. What that arrogant couple didn't know was that the woman hadn't come alone, and she was about to reveal 3 secrets that would destroy their perfect party. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. "Make sure you add Sarah Jenkins to the guest list," Brian Thompson said, leaning back in his leather chair, "and be sure to note she can bring a guest," his lips curved into a smile, "though I doubt she has anyone in her life." Victoria Reed looked up from her tablet, her pen hovering over the screen. "Your ex-wife? Are you sure that's a good idea, Mr. Thompson?" "Did I ask for your opinion, Victoria?" Brian's voice turned cold. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his home office, highlighting the expensive artwork on the walls. "No, sir. I'll add her right away." Victoria quickly tapped on her tablet, knowing better than to question her boss further. Brian stood and walked to the window. His $12 million mansion overlooked Lake Michigan in Winnetka, one of Chicago's wealthiest suburbs. The Gardners were setting up tents on the sprawling lawn for his daughter Emma's first birthday party. Everything had to be perfect. "Is there anything else for today's agenda?" he asked, not turning around. "You have lunch at 12 o'clock with the Horizon Innovations representative at Gibson's, then the board meeting at 3 o'clock. Brian nodded. "Tell my driver to be ready at 11:30. After Victoria left, Brian poured himself a cup of coffee from the silver carafe on his desk. He smiled, thinking about Sarah receiving the invitation to Emma's birthday. It had been 2 years since their divorce, and he knew she was struggling. The thought of her seeing everything she had lost gave him a feeling of satisfaction. The bedroom door opened, and Melissa walked in wearing yoga pants and a tank top that showed off her model figure. At 32, his new wife was still as beautiful as when she had walked the runway in New York. "The event planner just called," she said, kissing his cheek. "The princess decorations from Paris will be delivered tomorrow. Is that really necessary? Emma won't even remember this party." Brian set down his coffee cup. "It's not about what Emma remembers. It's about making a statement. Half of Chicago's elite will be here." Melissa picked up his coffee cup and took a sip. "Have you seen the guest list? Anyone interesting coming?" "The usual suspects," Brian replied. "Oh, and I invited Sarah." Melissa nearly choked on the coffee. "Your ex-wife? Why would you do that?" Brian shrugged. "I thought it would be polite." "Polite?" Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you care about being polite to Sarah?" Brian took the cup back from her. "Trust me, it's better this way. She should see what she's missing." Melissa stared at him for a moment. "You can be cruel sometimes, Brian." "Not cruel," he corrected her. "Strategic." Later that morning, Brian arrived at the gleaming glass tower of Thomson Technologies in downtown Chicago. As he walked through the lobby, employees nodded respectfully or quickly looked away. Everyone knew better than to waste the CEO's time with small talk. In his corner office on the 40th floor, Brian reviewed the latest market reports. Thomson Technologies' stock was up 2 points, and the potential merger with Horizon Innovations could double the company's value. He had built this company from nothing over 15 years, and now it was worth billions. His phone buzzed. "Robert Martinez is here to see you," his assistant announced. "Send him in." Robert walked in carrying a folder. At 45, the chief financial officer had been with the company almost as long as Brian. They had met in business school, and Brian had hired him when Thomson Technologies began to grow. "Morning, Brian," Robert said, placing the folder on the desk. "I've got the financial reports for the board meeting. The numbers look good." Brian flipped through the pages. "What about the discrepancies in the R&D department?" "Fixed," Robert replied. "I moved some funds around. No one will notice." Brian nodded approvingly. And the Horizon deal? Robert's expression changed slightly. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. There are rumors that their CEO is concerned about our management structure. What does that mean? Brian asked sharply. Some board members have been asking questions about your personal expenses charged to the company. Brian closed the folder with a snap. My personal expenses are none of their business. This company makes millions because of me. I know that, Robert said carefully, but the board is watching closely. This merger could make or break us. Brian waved his hand dismissively. Handle it like you always do. That's what I pay you for. At 12 o'clock, Brian sat across from James Wilson, the Vice President of Development at Horizon Innovations at Gibson's Steakhouse. The restaurant was packed with Chicago's business elite. The merger makes perfect sense, Brian said, cutting into his steak. Your hardware, our software. We could dominate the market within 2 years. James nodded. Our team is excited about the possibilities, but I have to ask, we've heard rumors about some unusual financial arrangements at Thomson Technologies. Brian's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What kind of rumors? Nothing specific, James replied. Just concerns about transparency. Brian forced a smile. Competitors spreading lies. Our books are completely open to your team during due diligence. James seemed satisfied with the answer, and they moved on to discussing market projections. Brian maintained his confident facade, but inside he was seething. Someone was talking too much. When Brian returned to his office, he found a message waiting from Daniel Wilson, Sarah's former attorney. He says it's important, his assistant said. Brian dialed the number, impatient. Daniel, what can I do for you? Brian, I heard from Sarah that she received an invitation to Emma's birthday party. Daniel said, I strongly advise against this kind of interaction. I don't recall asking for your advice, Brian replied coldly. Sarah is welcome to attend or not, as she chooses. This kind of game isn't good for anyone, Daniel continued. The divorce is final. There's no need to… Brian cut him off. I'm late for a board meeting. Goodbye, Daniel. He hung up and straightened his tie, irritated. The board meeting went smoothly despite Robert's warnings. Brian charmed the members with projections of record profits and the potential Horizon merger. No one directly questioned him about finances. That evening, Brian arrived home to find Melissa directing staff as they arranged furniture for the party. She was recording everything on her phone for her social media followers. This will be perfect for my lifestyle blog, she said, not looking up from her phone. I'm thinking of calling it Princess Emma's Royal First Birthday. My followers will love it. Brian poured himself a glass of 30-year-old scotch. Make sure the photographer gets my good side when I'm holding Emma. Always, Melissa replied with a practiced smile. By the way, did you see the final guest list? Over 100 confirmations so far? What about Sarah? Brian asked casually. Melissa checked her tablet. No response yet. Brian swirled his scotch. She'll come. She won't be able to resist seeing what she's lost. Later that night, after Melissa had gone to bed, Brian stood on his balcony overlooking the lake. In one hand, he held the invitation addressed to Sarah Jenkins, which he had taken from Victoria's desk before it was mailed. He ran his thumb over the embossed lettering, imagining Sarah's face when she opened it. Tomorrow, Victoria would mail this invitation, and in just a few weeks, Sarah would walk into his home and see everything she had failed to appreciate when she was his wife. The thought made Brian smile as he looked out at his perfect life, unaware that this very invitation would be the first domino to fall in the complete collapse of his world. The ornate cream envelope stood out among the stack of bills and advertisements in Sarah Jenkins' mailbox. Her name was printed in elegant gold lettering, the Thomson Technologies logo embossed in the corner. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she recognized it immediately. Bills, bills, and more bills, she muttered to herself. climbing the stairs to her modest two-bedroom apartment in Chicago's Lakeview neighborhood. Inside, Sarah placed the mail on her small dining table and stared at the envelope for several minutes before finding the courage to open it. The invitation inside was printed on thick cardstock with gold foil accents. "You are cordially invited to celebrate Emma Thompson's first birthday," Sarah read aloud, her voice trailing off. She sat down heavily in her kitchen chair. Why would Brian invite her to his daughter's birthday party? It had been 2 years since their divorce, 2 years of struggling to rebuild her life after he had left her for Melissa. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Hello? Sarah, it's Jessica. I'm running late for our meeting with Porter Media. Traffic is terrible on Michigan Avenue." "The meeting," Sarah said, suddenly remembering. "I'll head to the office now. See you there." Sarah tucked the invitation into her purse and grabbed her car keys. 20 minutes later, she pulled up to a converted industrial building in Wicker Park, where Jenkins Kim Digital Marketing occupied a small office on the second floor. Despite its modest size, the space was bright and professional. Sarah had used every penny of her divorce settlement to start this business with Jessica Kim, her friend from Northwestern University. After a decade of supporting Brian's career and putting her own ambitions on hold, starting over at 39 had not been easy. The meeting with Porter Media went well. Sarah's presentation was polished and confident, showing no trace of the emotional turmoil the invitation had stirred up. "Great job," Jessica said after their potential clients left. "I think we've got this account." Sarah nodded, distracted. She pulled out the invitation and handed it to Jessica. "What's this?" Jessica asked, then gasped as she read it. "Emma's birthday party? Brian invited you? That's bizarre." "It's not bizarre," Sarah replied. "It's deliberate. He wants me to see his perfect new life with his perfect new wife and their perfect baby." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "You're not going, right?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window overlooking the street below. "There's something you don't know, Jess," Sarah said finally. "Something I haven't told many people." Jessica set the invitation down. "What is it?" "I need to show you something. Can you come to my place after work?" Later that evening, Jessica followed Sarah into her apartment. They passed through the living room with its second-hand furniture and modest decor, nothing like the luxury Sarah had once been accustomed to. "When Brian left me for Melissa, he made sure I got as little as possible," Sarah explained as they walked down the hallway. "His lawyers found every loophole I was left with, barely enough for a down payment on this place." Jessica frowned. "I still don't understand why you've been so private about your home. We've been friends for years and this is only my 3rd time here." Sarah stopped at a closed door at the end of the hall. "This is why." She opened the door slowly. The room was painted a soft blue with animal decals on the walls. 3 identical cribs stood side by side, each containing a sleeping toddler boy with dark hair. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. "Sarah, meet Alexander, Benjamin, and Christopher," Sarah whispered. "They're 2 years old." "Brian's—" Jessica couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah nodded. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized. At first, I thought it was just one baby. When the doctor told me it was triplets, I nearly fainted." They moved back to the living room, speaking in hushed tones to avoid waking the children. "Why didn't you tell Brian?" Jessica asked. Sarah's expression hardened. "By the time I knew about the pregnancy, he was already with Melissa. He made it very clear during the divorce that he didn't want children. He said they would interfere with his career goals. Then 6 months after leaving me, he got Melissa pregnant with Emma." Jessica shook her head in disbelief. "So he has 4 children and only knows about one? He abandoned me when I needed him most. He used his connections to make sure I got almost nothing in the divorce. Why would I give him the chance to reject these boys too?" Sarah's voice broke slightly. "They deserve better than that." "But now he's invited you to this party," Jessica said, understanding dawning. "You're thinking of going and bringing the boys." Sarah nodded slowly. "It's time he knew. The next morning, Sarah sat in Daniel Wilson's law office downtown. The attorney who had represented her during the divorce looked concerned as she explained her plan. "Sarah, are you sure about this? Revealing the triplets at Emma's birthday party could backfire terribly," Daniel warned. "I don't want to hurt anyone, Daniel." "This isn't about revenge," Sarah insisted, "but Brian needs to know about his sons, and the boys deserve to have their father in their lives. If he chooses to be—" Daniel sighed and opened a folder. "I've prepared the documentation, birth certificates, DNA test results from their medical procedures last year. There's no question they're his children." "Thank you," Sarah said, taking the folder. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Brian has a lot of power and influence. This won't go down easily." Later that week, Sarah met Robert Martinez at a small coffee shop far from Thomson Technologies' headquarters. Robert looked nervous as he sat across from her, constantly checking to make sure no one recognized him. "I brought what you asked for," he said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "Financial records, offshore accounts, everything." "Are you sure about this, Robert?" Sarah asked. "You're risking your job." Robert looked down at his coffee. "I've covered for Brian for years. The way he treated you was bad enough, but now he's breaking the law. The board is already suspicious. It's only a matter of time before everything falls apart." Sarah tucked the USB drive into her purse. "I still haven't decided if I'll use this. My main concern is introducing Brian to his sons." "Just be prepared," Robert warned. "Brian doesn't like losing control. When he sees those boys, he'll do whatever it takes to protect his image." That night, Sarah sat on her couch after putting the triplets to bed. She held the invitation in one hand and a small photo album in the other, pictures of the boys from birth to their second birthday. Moments Brian had missed, their first smiles, first steps, first words. She picked up her phone and dialed Jessica. "I've decided," Sarah said when her friend answered. "I'm going to the party and I'm bringing the boys." "Are you sure?" Jessica asked. "Yes, and I need you to come with me for support." "Of course," Jessica replied without hesitation. "What about the financial information from Robert?" Sarah looked at her purse where the USB drive was hidden. "That's Plan B. I hope I don't need it." She hung up and walked to the boys' room, watching them sleep peacefully. Alexander, the oldest by 2 minutes, clutched his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Benjamin, the quietest of the three, slept with his thumb in his mouth. Christopher, the most active, had already kicked off his blanket. "I'm doing this for you," she whispered. "You deserve to know your father, and he deserves a chance to know you." Sarah didn't know if Brian would accept his sons or reject them. She didn't know if he would try to use his power and money to take them away from her. All she knew was that in 16 days she would walk into Brian Thompson's mansion with 3 little boys who looked exactly like him, and nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah placed the USB drive in her desk drawer and locked it. 1 week remained until Emma's birthday party, and she needed to focus on preparing the triplets for their first meeting with their father. She hadn't decided yet if she would use Robert's financial evidence against Brian. For now, introducing him to his sons was her priority. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows as Sarah prepared breakfast for the boys. Alexander and Christopher chased each other around the small kitchen table, while Benjamin quietly arranged his toy cars in a straight line. "Boys, breakfast is ready," Sarah called, setting 3 small plates of scrambled eggs on the table. The phone rang as the triplets climbed into their seats. "Sarah, it's Daniel. Did you review those documents I sent over?" "Yes," Sarah replied, watching the boys eat. "The birth certificates, medical records, and DNA test results are all in order." "Good," Daniel said. "I've prepared a folder with everything you'll need at the party. Remember, stay calm no matter how Brian reacts." After hanging up, Sarah knelt beside the triplets. "Remember how I told you about meeting someone special soon?" she asked. "The party," Christopher said excitedly. "Yes, the party. We'll meet a man named Brian. He's—" Sarah paused, searching for simple words. "He's your daddy." "Like Tommy's daddy?" Alexander asked, referring to a friend from playgroup. Yes, like Tommy's daddy, Sarah replied, her heart aching at how little they understood what was about to happen. Across town in Winnetka, Brian Thompson stood at the head of the conference table in Thompson Technologies' downtown headquarters. 8 board members watched him with varying expressions of concern and suspicion. "These quarterly reports show our strongest performance to date," Brian said confidently. "The Horizon merger will push our valuation even higher." Walter Green, the oldest board member, adjusted his glasses. "Before we discuss the merger, I'd like clarification on these expenses." He tapped a report in front of him. "There's a $2 million discrepancy in the R&D department budget." Brian maintained his composure. "A simple accounting error. The funds were allocated to the new security protocol development without board approval," Walter pressed. Robert Martinez cleared his throat. "If I may explain," he interjected, coming to Brian's aid. "Those funds were reallocated under the emergency provision in Section 7 of our bylaws. I have the documentation here." Brian shot Robert a grateful look as the CFO distributed folders to each board member. What Brian didn't see was the slight nod Robert exchanged with Walter when Brian looked away. After the meeting, Brian pulled Robert into his office. "That was close," Brian said, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. "Green is becoming a problem." Robert accepted the drink but didn't sip it. "I've got it handled. Just focus on the Horizon deal." Brian's phone rang. "It's the party planner. I need to take this." He waved Robert out of the office. When the door closed, Robert quietly placed his untouched drink on a side table and left, pulling out his phone to text Sarah. Meeting done, he suspects nothing. That evening, Brian inspected the party preparations at his mansion. Workers were setting up an elaborate princess castle structure on the lawn. "The ice sculpture goes there," Brian pointed, "and the gift table needs to be larger." Melissa appeared in the doorway wearing a silk robe, baby Emma in her arms. "Brian, we need to talk." Inside their bedroom, Melissa laid Emma in her crib. "I still don't understand why you invited Sarah. It seems cruel." Brian loosened his tie. "I told you it's strategic. Sarah needs to see what she lost." "But why? The divorce was 2 years ago. You got what you wanted." Brian's expression hardened. "Sarah never believed in me. When I was building the company, she was always talking about starting a family, slowing down. She wanted me to settle for less." Melissa studied her husband's face. "And now you have Emma, and me, and the company. You have everything. So why do you still care what Sarah thinks?" Brian didn't answer, but Melissa saw something in his eyes that made her uneasy. The next morning, Sarah sat in a client meeting at a downtown restaurant. Jessica smiled broadly as the client, a national retail chain, signed the contract. "This is our biggest account yet," Jessica whispered as they walked the client out. "We did it," Sarah replied, feeling a moment of pride. Their small agency was finally gaining traction. Back at the office, Sarah closed the door and turned to Jessica. "I need your help preparing for the party." "Whatever you need," Jessica promised. "I need to practice what I'll say to Brian when I introduce the boys." Jessica sat down. "Okay, I'll be Brian. How will you start?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Brian, I'd like you to meet Alexander, Benjamin, and Christopher. They're your sons." "That's direct." Jessica nodded. "He'll probably deny it immediately." "I'll have the DNA results ready," Sarah continued. "And the boys look exactly like him. There's no denying they're his children." "What if he gets angry? Makes a scene?" Jessica asked. Sarah's confidence wavered. "Daniel will be on standby, and Robert will be there too." Later that afternoon, Sarah met Robert in a small park where the triplets could play while they talked. "The board is starting to ask questions," Robert said quietly, watching the boys on the slide. Brian dismissed it, but they're not satisfied with his explanations. "Will you tell them about the evidence?" Sarah asked. Robert shook his head. "Not yet. The timing has to be right." He watched Christopher help Benjamin climb the ladder. "They're good kids. They deserve better than Brian as a father." "Everyone deserves a chance to change," Sarah replied. Even Brian." Robert looked skeptical. "I've known Brian since college. People like him don't change unless they're forced to." That evening, Sarah and Jessica visited a small boutique to find an outfit for the party. "Nothing too flashy," Sarah instructed. "I want to look confident and successful, but not like I'm trying too hard." Jessica held up a simple blue dress. "This is perfect, professional but elegant." As Sarah tried on the dress, Jessica asked the question that had been bothering her. "Are you going to use the financial information from Robert?" Sarah looked at herself in the mirror. "I hope I won't need to. This isn't about destroying Brian. It's about doing what's right for the boys." "But if he reacts badly?" Jessica pressed. "Then I'll do whatever I need to protect my children," Sarah answered firmly. The night before the party, Sarah sat with the triplets on her living room floor, showing them pictures of Brian. "This is the man we're going to meet tomorrow," she explained gently. "His name is Brian." "Is he nice?" Alexander asked. Sarah hesitated. "He might be surprised to meet you. He might act confused or even upset. But that's not because of you. It's because grown-ups sometimes have complicated feelings." "Will he like us?" Benjamin asked quietly. Sarah hugged him close. "Anyone who knows you would love you. You are wonderful boys." After tucking the children into bed, Sarah called her parents in Michigan. "Everything's ready, Mom," she said. "The boys are excited about the party, though they don't understand what's really happening." "We're here if you need us," her mother assured her. "We can drive down tomorrow if things don't go well." "I hope it won't come to that," Sarah replied. "But thank you." In Winnetka, Brian checked the final guest list in his home office. He scrolled down to Sarah's name, noting she hadn't declined the invitation. "Sir?" Victoria stood in the doorway. "The final RSVP count is 123 guests." "Did Sarah Jenkins respond?" Brian asked, trying to sound casual. "No, sir. She didn't confirm or decline." Brian frowned. "Make sure security knows who she is. If she comes, I want to know immediately." After Victoria left, Brian opened his desk drawer and took out an old photo, Sarah and him at their wedding 10 years ago. He stared at it briefly before putting it away when he heard Melissa approaching. "Everything's ready for tomorrow," Melissa said. "The photographer arrives at 11, guests at 12. Emma's outfit is perfect." "Good," Brian nodded. "Everything needs to be perfect." That night, Brian lay awake while Melissa slept beside him. Tomorrow, he would show Sarah everything she had lost when she failed to support his ambitions. He imagined her face when she saw his success, his new family. The thought should have brought him satisfaction, but instead, he felt a strange unease. Across the city, Sarah also lay awake, rehearsing what she would say to Brian. Beside her bed sat the folder of legal documents and a small photo album documenting the triplets' lives. Tomorrow, Brian would learn he had 3 more children. Tomorrow, his carefully constructed world would begin to unravel. And Sarah still hadn't decided if she would use the financial evidence Robert had provided. Evidence that could destroy not just Brian's image, but his entire career. The decision weighed on her as she finally drifted to sleep. By this time tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same again for either of them. The morning of Emma's birthday party arrived with clear blue skies and bright sunshine. Sarah woke early, her heart racing as she realized what day it was. Today, Brian Thompson would meet his sons for the first time. "Rise and shine, boys," Sarah called, opening the curtains in the triplets' bedroom. "Today is the special party I told you about." Alexander was the first to jump out of bed, always eager to start the day. Benjamin rubbed his eyes sleepily, while Christopher tried to hide under his blanket. "I don't want to go," Christopher mumbled. Sarah sat on his bed. "Remember the man in the picture, the one I told you about? We're going to meet him today." "Our daddy?" Alexander asked, pulling on Sarah's arm. "Yes," Sarah nodded. "Your daddy." The doorbell rang as Sarah was helping the boys brush their teeth. "It's open," she called. Jessica walked in carrying garment bags. "I picked up the suits from the cleaners. They look adorable." "Thank you for doing this," Sarah said. "I couldn't handle it alone." Jessica squeezed her friend's hand. "You're not alone. I'll be right beside you the whole time." Across town in Winnetka, the Thompson estate buzzed with activity workers arranged tables and chairs on the lawn. A massive Princess Castle bouncy house was being inflated. Caterers bustled in and out of the kitchen. Brian stood in the center of it all, checking his watch. "The ice sculpture should have been here 30 minutes ago," he snapped at Victoria. "I just called them, sir," Victoria replied calmly. "They're 15 minutes away." "Unacceptable," Brian muttered. "And where are the photographers? They were supposed to be here at 11. "They're setting up by the gazebo as requested," Victoria pointed toward the garden. Brian nodded curtly and strode toward the house. Inside, Melissa sat at her vanity while a stylist arranged her hair. "How's it going out there?" she asked, seeing Brian's reflection in the mirror. "Everything's behind schedule," he complained, straightening his tie. "The ice sculpture is late. The cake table is in the wrong spot." Melissa stood up, her silk robe flowing around her. "Brian, relax. It's just a birthday party." "It's not just a party," Brian said sharply. "Half of Chicago's elite will be here. The CEO of Horizon Innovations is coming. This is business as much as pleasure." Melissa studied her husband's face. "You're not worried about the party. You're worried about whether Sarah will show up." Brian turned away. "Don't be ridiculous. Then why do you keep checking your watch and looking at the entrance?" Before Brian could answer, a nanny entered with Emma in her arms. The baby wore a tiny pink princess dress with a matching tiara. "Look at our beautiful birthday girl," Melissa cooed, taking Emma from the nanny. Her irritation with Brian instantly forgotten. "Mommy needs to finish getting ready, and then we'll take some special pictures." At noon, the first guests began to arrive. Brian stood at the entrance, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. With each new arrival, he glanced past them, searching for Sarah. "Brian, congratulations on the merger talks," called Michael Peterson, a prominent Chicago banker. "I hear Horizon is ready to sign." "Nearly there," Brian smiled. "Just finalizing the details." Robert Martinez arrived shortly after, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. He approached Brian with a practiced smile. "Quite the event you've put together," Robert said, his phone discreetly recording in his pocket. "Emma will be impressed when she's older and sees the photos." "Nothing but the best for my daughter," Brian replied. "By the way, how did you resolve those questions from the board?" Green was particularly persistent. Robert's expression remained neutral. "All handled. I adjusted those reports, as we discussed. Nothing to worry about today." A local news crew set up their equipment near the cake table. The reporter, a young woman in a yellow dress, approached Brian. "Mr. Thompson, we're thrilled to include Emma's party in our Chicago's Power Families segment. Could we get a few words from you and your wife?" "Of course," Brian nodded. "Find us after the cake cutting." As more guests arrived, Brian grew increasingly distracted. He checked his phone repeatedly and kept glancing toward the driveway. Meanwhile, Sarah's car approached the Thompson estate. In the back seat, the triplets were secured in their car seats, dressed in matching blue suits with tiny bow ties. "Remember what we practiced," Jessica said from the passenger seat. "Stay calm no matter how he reacts." Sarah nodded, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I'm doing this for the boys. They deserve to know their father." "Do you have the folder?" Jessica asked. "In my purse," Sarah confirmed. "Birth certificates, medical records, DNA test results." As they turned onto the long driveway leading to the mansion, Sarah gasped at the scene before them. Luxury cars lined the drive. On the vast lawn, hundreds of guests mingled around elaborately decorated tables. A Princess Castle bounce house dominated one area, while a petting zoo had been set up in another. "Wow," Jessica whispered. "This is excessive," Sarah finished. "All this for a 1-year-old who won't even remember it." They parked behind a line of cars. Sarah took a deep breath before turning to the boys. "We're here. Remember, There will be lots of people. Stay close to me and Aunt Jessica." "Is Daddy here?" Benjamin asked quietly. Sarah nodded. "Yes, he is. And he doesn't know about you yet, so he might be surprised." Inside the party, Victoria approached Brian as he chatted with a group of investors. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson," she said quietly. "She's here." Brian stiffened. "Sarah?" "Yes, sir. And she's not alone. She has 3 small children with her." Brian frowned. "Children? Whose children?" Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know, sir, but they look about 2 years old, and they're identical triplets, I believe." Brian excused himself from the group and moved toward the entrance, confusion evident on his face. He hadn't heard that Sarah had children. Had she remarried? Adopted? It didn't make sense. At the entrance to the garden, Sarah stood with Jessica, each holding the hand of one of the boys. All 3 children looked around with wide eyes at the elaborate party. Several guests turned to look at them, some recognizing Sarah as Brian's ex-wife. "There he is," Jessica whispered, nodding toward Brian, who was making his way through the crowd. Sarah knelt down to the triplets' level. "Remember, Mommy loves you no matter what happens next." Brian stopped several feet away, his confident facade faltering as he took in the sight before him. 3 identical boys with dark hair and familiar features. His features. The party's background music seemed suddenly distant as he stared at the children. Melissa, noticing Brian's expression, moved to his side with Emma in her arms. "What's going on?" she asked, then followed his gaze to Sarah and the 3 little boys. Sarah stood, straightened her blue dress, and walked forward with the triplets. The party guests nearby fell silent, sensing something significant was about to happen. "Hello, Brian," Sarah said calmly. "It's been a while." Brian struggled to find words. "Sarah, you brought guests." "Yes," Sarah replied. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. "I'd like you to meet Alexander, Benjamin, and Christopher." She paused, looking directly into Brian's eyes before delivering the words that would change everything. "Your sons." A collective gasp spread through the nearby guests. Brian's face drained of color as he stared at the 3 little boys who were undeniably his. Each had his dark hair, his eyes, even the cleft in their chins that was a Thompson family trait. Melissa's grip on Emma tightened as she looked from the boys to Brian, shock and betrayal washing over her face. "This is a joke," Brian finally managed to say. "Some kind of trick." Sarah calmly reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. DNA tests, birth certificates, medical records. They were born 7 months after our divorce was finalized. They're 2 years old now. Brian looked from the folder to the boys, his mind racing to process this revelation. Alexander stared back at him curiously, while Benjamin partly hid behind Sarah's leg. Christopher, the boldest of the 3, took a step forward. "Are you our daddy?" he asked loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. The question hung in the air as Brian's carefully constructed world began to crumble around him. Across the lawn, Robert Martinez observed the scene while discreetly sending a text message. The second phase of Sarah's revelation was about to begin, and Brian had no idea that his personal shock was only the beginning of his downfall. Brian stared at Christopher's innocent face, unable to answer the simple question. The little boy waited, his eyes, Brian's eyes, looking up expectantly. "This is inappropriate," Brian finally said, turning to the guests closest to them. "Please, enjoy the party. This is a private matter." Several guests awkwardly moved away, but most lingered within earshot, pretending to focus on their drinks while watching the drama unfold. The news crew had noticed the commotion and was slowly repositioning their camera. "Private?" Sarah said. "Like how you privately made sure I got almost nothing in our divorce? Or how you privately moved on with Melissa before our marriage was even over?" Melissa stepped forward, still holding Emma. "I think you should leave. This is our daughter's birthday party." "And these are his sons," Sarah replied calmly. Sons he never knew about because he was too busy building his new perfect family to even check if I was okay after he left. Brian grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her away from the crowd. What kind of game are you playing? You can't just show up here with your children? Sarah finished, pulling her arm free. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized, triplets. I was terrified and alone. If they're really mine, why didn't you tell me? Brian demanded. Would you have cared? You made it very clear during our marriage that children would interfere with your precious career goals. The triplets clung to Jessica's hands, watching the adults with confused expressions. Alexander, always the most perceptive, began to cry softly. Brian noticed and lowered his voice. We need to discuss this privately. Not here, not now. I tried to contact you privately many times after the divorce, Sarah said. Your lawyers blocked every attempt. This invitation was the first direct communication I've had from you in 2 years. As they argued, Robert Martinez approached with Walter Green, the senior board member who had questioned Brian in the meeting. Brian, Robert said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby guests. We need to talk. Brian turned, irritation flashing across his face. Not now, Robert. I'm dealing with something. This can't wait, Robert insisted. The board meeting on Monday isn't about the merger, Brian. Brian's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? It's about removing you as CEO, Robert said. Walter Green nodded gravely beside him. A new wave of whispers spread through the watching guests. The reporter from the local news station edged closer, her cameraman following. What is this? Brian looked from Robert to Sarah. Are you two working together? Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. For the past 6 months, I've been gathering evidence. The accounting errors you've been covering up aren't errors at all. You've been systematically embezzling company funds to pay for all this. He gestured around at the extravagant party. Brian's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. You've been my CFO for years. If there were financial irregularities, you're equally responsible. I kept records of every time you instructed me to move money, Robert replied. Every offshore account, every falsified report, and I've provided all of it to the board and the SEC. The color drained from Brian's face. He looked at Sarah. You put him up to this? Sarah shook her head. Robert came to me. He was concerned about the company and the employees whose jobs would be at risk if your fraud was discovered suddenly. We wanted to handle this responsibly. Brian lunged at Robert, grabbing him by the lapels of his jacket. You treacherous bastard! I made you rich! I gave you everything! Security guards moved quickly across the lawn as Brian shoved Robert backward. Guests gasped and backed away. The news camera recorded everything. Brian, stop! Melissa cried, shielding Emma from the scene. The security guards pulled Brian away from Robert, who straightened his jacket calmly. You're done, Brian, Robert said quietly. The board has seen everything. There will be a vote on Monday, but it's just a formality. Thompson Technologies isn't yours anymore. Brian struggled against the security guards. This is my company. My name is on the building. The triplets were now crying openly, frightened by the shouting and commotion. Sarah knelt beside them, trying to comfort them. It's okay, she whispered. We're going to go home soon. Brian saw the boys crying, and something shifted in his expression. For a brief moment, the mask of anger fell away, replaced by confusion and what might have been shame. Then his face hardened again. Get them out of here, he ordered the security guards, pointing at Sarah and the triplets. All of them. Sir, one of the guards said hesitantly, we were hired to provide security, not to remove guests. Walter Green stepped forward. As acting chairman of the board, I suggest you calm down, Brian. Making a bigger scene will only make things worse for you. The party had now completely stopped. Guests stood in clusters, watching the confrontation. Some were already leaving, hurrying to their cars with uncomfortable expressions. Melissa approached Brian, her voice low and urgent. Brian, enough! You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing me. Think about Emma. For the first time, Brian seemed to register the full impact of what was happening. His daughter's birthday party was ruined. His wife was looking at him with a mixture of horror and disgust. His company was slipping from his grasp. And 3 little boys, his sons, were crying because of his outburst. His shoulders slumped. "Take me inside," he told the security guards. "I need a minute." As the guards escorted Brian toward the house, he looked back at Sarah and the triplets. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow. After Brian disappeared into the mansion, Melissa approached Sarah, still holding Emma. "Did you know?" Melissa asked, her voice shaking. "When we got together, did you know you were pregnant?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I found out weeks later. By then you two were already all over the society pages." Melissa looked down at Emma, then at the triplet boys who were gradually calming down. "They look just like him." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "What do you want?" "Money." "I want my children to know their father," Sarah replied, "and I want him to take responsibility for them and for everything else he's done." Robert joined them, along with Walter Green and several other board members who had been at the party. "We're sorry about this," Walter said to Sarah. "Had we known about the children—" "This isn't your fault," Sarah assured him. "Brian made his own choices." Inside the mansion, Brian paced his office, making frantic phone calls to his attorneys. None were answering on a Saturday afternoon. He downed a glass of scotch and poured another, his hand shaking. Victoria knocked tentatively on the door. "Sir, the guests are leaving. Mrs. Thompson is asking what she should tell them." "Tell them whatever you want," Brian snapped. "The party's over." Victoria hesitated. "And the news crew? They're requesting a statement." Brian laughed bitterly. "I bet they are." Outside on the lawn, Sarah was preparing to leave with the triplets and Jessica. She had accomplished what she came to do. Brian knew about his sons now. "Are we going home?" Benjamin asked, his small hand in hers. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going home." "But we didn't meet Daddy," Alexander said, looking around. Sarah knelt down to their level. "That man who was yelling? That's your father. He was surprised to meet you. Sometimes grown-ups get surprised and they don't know how to act. We'll give him some time to think." As they walked toward the parking area, Robert caught up with them. "Sarah, wait," he called. "The board wants to talk to you." Sarah looked back at the house where Brian remained hidden. "Not today, Robert. The boys have been through enough. I understand. But this isn't over. Brian won't take this lying down. Once he processes what happened, he'll fight back with everything he has." Sarah nodded. "I know. That's why I made copies of everything, the paternity tests, your financial evidence, all of it. If he tries to take the boys from me or claims they aren't his, I'm ready." As Sarah drove away from the Thompson estate, she watched her sons in the rearview mirror. They were already bouncing back, pointing excitedly at a fire truck they passed. Children were resilient. She hoped she was too, because as Robert had said, this wasn't over. Brian would recover from the initial shock, and when he did, he would use every resource at his disposal to fight back against the paternity claims, against the financial accusations, against everyone he now saw as an enemy. But for the first time in 2 years, Sarah felt strong. She had faced her greatest fear and survived. Whatever came next, she would face that too. The drive back to Sarah's apartment was quiet. Jessica glanced at her friend, concerned about her calm exterior. "Are you okay?" Jessica finally asked. Sarah nodded, keeping her eyes on the road. "Better than I expected. It needed to happen." In the back seat, the triplets had fallen asleep, exhausted from the emotional afternoon. "What do you think Brian will do next?" Jessica asked. "Exactly what Robert said. He'll fight back. Brian Thompson doesn't lose gracefully." 4 hours after the disastrous party, Brian sat in his home office, tie loosened and hair disheveled. The house was eerily quiet now, with only staff remaining to clean up the abandoned celebration. He stared at his phone. waiting for his attorney to call back. The door opened, and Melissa walked in. She had changed out of her party dress into casual clothes. Her eyes were red from crying. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Are those boys yours?" Brian poured another scotch. "They look like me, but that doesn't mean anything Sarah could have. Stop lying!" Melissa slammed her hand on his desk. "I saw them, Brian. They're identical to you. When did you know?" "I didn't know," Brian insisted. "She never told me she was pregnant." "So you're saying those are your children? Children you've never supported?" Brian stood up, swaying slightly. "What does it matter? They're not part of our lives." Melissa stared at him, disbelief in her eyes. 3 little boys, your flesh and blood, and it doesn't matter? What kind of man are you? "The kind who built a billion-dollar company," Brian shouted. "The kind who gave you this life." "A life built on stolen money, apparently?" Melissa's voice was ice-cold. "Was Robert telling the truth about that too? Have you been embezzling from your own company?" Brian avoided her gaze. "It's complicated. Business finances are—" "Don't patronize me," Melissa cut him off. "I want the truth. Now." After a long pause, Brian slumped back into his chair. "Yes, some of the money. I moved it around. The company is mine. I built it. I deserve—" Melissa didn't let him finish. She walked out of the office and up the stairs. 20 minutes later, she returned with a suitcase and Emma in her arms. "Where are you going?" Brian demanded. "To my sister's," Melissa replied. "I need time to think." "You can't take Emma," Brian said, standing up. "Watch me." Melissa's voice was firm. "She's coming with me. You're in no state to care for her right now." Brian reached for his phone. "I'll call my lawyers. They'll—" "Your lawyers aren't answering, are they?" Melissa's laugh was bitter. "They've seen the news, Brian. It's already all over social media. Tech CEO meltdown at daughter's birthday party, complete with video." Brian's face paled as he grabbed the remote and turned on the television. A local Chicago news station was already running the story, showing blurry cell phone footage of him lunging at Robert Thompson Technologies' CEO. "Brian Thompson is facing serious allegations of financial misconduct," the anchor reported. "Sources close to the company confirm the board will meet Monday to vote on his removal." As Melissa left with Emma, Brian frantically tried his attorneys again. This time, one answered. "Alan, I need you to fix this," Brian said immediately. "Fix what exactly?" Alan Prescott's voice was cautious. "The paternity issue or the financial fraud allegations? Because both are serious, Brian. All of it. They can't just take my company." "The board can if they have evidence you've been embezzling funds," Alan replied. "And as for the children, if those are your biological sons, you have legal and financial obligations." Brian hung up and threw his phone across the room. Across town, Sarah tucked the triplets into bed. They had been confused and upset after the party, asking questions she struggled to answer. "Why was that man yelling, Mommy?" Alexander asked. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "Sometimes adults get very surprised and they don't know how to handle their feelings. Is he mad at us?" Benjamin's voice was small. "No, sweetheart," Sarah stroked his hair. "He's not mad at you. He didn't know about you before today, and that was a big surprise for him. Will we see him again?" Christopher asked. Sarah hesitated. "I don't know. That's up to him. But no matter what happens, you have me and Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Jessica." After the boys fell asleep, Sarah found Jessica in the living room, watching the news. "You're famous," Jessica said, pointing to the TV where grainy footage showed Sarah confronting Brian. "This isn't how I wanted it to happen." Sarah sighed. Her phone rang. It was Daniel. "I've seen the news," he said. "Are you and the boys okay?" "We're fine. It was intense, but necessary." "Brian's attorneys will be in touch soon," Daniel warned. "Once he recovers from the shock, he'll either try to fight the paternity or demand custody rights." "I know," Sarah replied. "I'm ready for either." Meanwhile, at Thompson Technologies headquarters, Robert Martinez sat in the boardroom with 7 board members who had assembled for an emergency Saturday night meeting. "These documents prove systematic embezzlement over the past 3 years," Robert explained, distributing folders. "Brian has been diverting company funds to personal accounts, primarily to support his lifestyle." Walter Green studied the papers. "And you've been aware of this how long?" "I noticed discrepancies about a year ago," Robert admitted. "At first, I thought they were errors. When I realized what Brian was doing, I began documenting everything." "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Another board member asked. "Brian built this company. I wanted to give him a chance to fix things quietly," Robert explained. "But when he continued and the amounts increased, I knew I had to act." "And Sarah Jenkins? What's her involvement in this?" Walter asked. "She's not involved in the financial matters," Robert clarified. "I approached her 6 months ago when I learned about the children. We agreed to coordinate our actions to minimize damage to the company." After 2 hours of discussion, the board voted unanimously to suspend Brian pending a formal vote on Monday. "We'll need to issue a press statement tonight," Walter said, "and freeze all company accounts Brian has access to." At 10 o'clock that night, Brian discovered his corporate credit cards had been declined while ordering dinner. His phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Thompson?" a formal voice said. "This is James Wilson from First Chicago Bank. I'm calling to inform you that we've received instructions from the Thompson Technologies board to freeze several accounts." Brian slammed down the phone. He poured another drink, his hand shaking. After a moment of hesitation, he dialed Sarah's number. Sarah was surprised to see Brian's name on her caller ID. She answered cautiously. "What do you want, Brian? You think you've won?" His words were slightly slurred. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Sarah replied calmly. "That's why I kept the boys from you until now." "Those children, you should have told me." Brian's voice changed, almost breaking. "Would it have made a difference? Would you have stepped up as their father?" There was a long pause before Brian spoke again. "You turned Robert against me." "No, Brian, you did that yourself," Sarah said. "Your financial crimes are your own doing." "I'll fight this," Brian threatened. "All of it. The company, the kids, everything. I'll make you regret today." "The only person who should have regrets is you," Sarah replied before hanging up. She immediately called Daniel. "Brian just called. He was threatening me." "Record any future calls," Daniel advised. "We may need them if he tries to pursue custody." The next morning, Sunday news programs featured the story prominently. "Chicago Tech CEO faces triple trouble," read one headline with split-screen images of Brian's confrontation with Robert and the triplet boys. In her sister's guest bedroom, Melissa watched the coverage while Emma played on the floor. Her phone had dozens of missed calls from reporters and social media messages from followers asking for her side of the story. Her sister Kate entered with coffee. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" Melissa looked at Emma, then back at the TV screen showing Brian's angry face. "Yes, I'm calling my attorney tomorrow. I want a divorce." At Thompson Technologies, Rebecca Chen, the company's chief operating officer, had been called in to prepare for Monday's transition. Robert briefed her on the situation. "The board wants you to step in as interim CEO after tomorrow's vote," he explained. Rebecca looked concerned. "This is a mess, Robert. The Horizon merger is certainly dead now." "Probably," Robert agreed, "but saving the company is more important." In his increasingly empty mansion, Brian finally reached his lead attorney, who agreed to come to the house. As he waited, Brian's phone rang again. It was Jack Peterson, CEO of Horizon Innovations. "Brian," Jack's voice was formal, "I'll be brief. Given yesterday's events and the allegations that have surfaced, Horizon is terminating merger discussions effective immediately." Brian didn't respond. He simply hung up and stared at the wall, watching as every aspect of the perfect life he had built crumbled around him. The days following Emma's birthday party passed in a blur of legal meetings and media coverage. 1 week later, Brian Thompson walked into the offices of Prescott Legal. the third law firm he had visited that day. 2 prominent Chicago firms had already declined to represent him after seeing the evidence against him. "Mr. Thompson, Alan Prescott will see you now," the receptionist said. Alan Prescott was not Brian's first choice. His small office in a less prestigious part of downtown Chicago lacked the impressive views and expensive artwork Brian was accustomed to. But Prescott had a reputation for taking on difficult cases that other lawyers avoided. "Thank you for meeting with me," Brian said, shaking the attorney's hand. Prescott gestured to a chair. "Let's be clear from the start. I've reviewed the financial evidence against you. It's substantial." "Those records were obtained illegally," Brian insisted. "Robert Martinez violated confidentiality agreements." "Maybe so," Prescott replied. "But the SEC doesn't care how they got the information. They care that you apparently moved company funds to personal accounts." Brian leaned forward. "What about the paternity case? Those children—" "The triplets?" Prescott interrupted. "I've seen the photos from the party. They look exactly like you, Mr. Thompson." "Appearances can be deceiving," Brian muttered. "DNA rarely is," Prescott countered. "The court has ordered testing, correct?" Brian nodded. "Tomorrow morning. Then we'll know for certain, but I suggest you prepare for the likelihood that they are indeed your biological sons." Across town, Sarah sat in Daniel Wilson's office reviewing custody documents. The walls were lined with law books, and family photos decorated his desk. "The DNA testing is scheduled for tomorrow," Daniel explained. "Once paternity is established, we can proceed with the child support claim." Sarah sighed. "This isn't about money, Daniel. It's about Brian acknowledging his responsibility." "I understand," Daniel replied gently, "but these boys deserve financial support from their father. Given Brian's lifestyle, the court will likely award substantial support payments. If he has any money left," Sarah pointed out, "his assets might be frozen if criminal charges are filed." Daniel nodded. "Which is why we're requesting expedited processing. We want to establish the support order before any potential criminal proceedings." In another law office downtown, Melissa Thompson sat with her attorney, Catherine Reed. Emma played quietly with toys in the corner of the room. "I want full custody," Melissa stated firmly. "Given the circumstances, I don't think that will be difficult." Catherine made notes. "Brian hasn't been charged with any crime yet, but the allegations are serious. What about the financial aspects?" Melissa looked down at her hands. "I don't want his stolen money, but I need to provide for Emma." "Do you have income of your own?" Catherine asked. "My social media partnerships generate about $500,000 annually," Melissa replied, "and I've been approached about writing a book." "A book about your marriage to Brian?" Melissa nodded. "Several publishers have reached out since the party. They're offering substantial advances." At Thompson Technologies headquarters, Rebecca Chen addressed the employees from the main conference room. Robert Martinez stood beside her. "As you know, the board has voted unanimously to remove Brian Thompson as CEO," Rebecca announced. "I have been appointed interim CEO while the company conducts a search for permanent leadership." A young programmer raised his hand. "What about our jobs? Are we at risk because of the financial issues?" "Your jobs are secure," Rebecca assured him. "Thompson Technologies remains financially sound. The improprieties were limited to specific accounts Brian controlled." "And the Horizon merger?" another employee asked. Robert stepped forward. "Unfortunately, Horizon has withdrawn from merger discussions. However, we have other partnership opportunities we're exploring." After the meeting, Robert returned to his office to find Brian waiting for him. "How did you get in here?" Robert demanded. "Security was supposed to revoke your access." Brian smiled coldly. "I built this company. You think I don't know ways around security protocols?" "You need to leave," Robert said, reaching for his phone. "Or I'll call security." Brian stepped closer. "I trusted you. For years I thought you were my friend." "I was your friend," Robert replied. "That's why I tried to warn you multiple times about the board's concerns. You didn't listen." "Friends don't betray each other," Brian hissed. "This wasn't betrayal, Brian. This was accountability," Robert said firmly. "You were stealing from the company, from the employees who trusted you." Brian's face hardened. "You worked with Sarah behind my back. You both planned this ambush." "Sarah contacted me after I approached her," Robert clarified. "I discovered the triplets when I was gathering financial evidence. Medical bills, Brian. You should have been paying them." Brian looked away. "If she had told me about the pregnancy, would you have stepped up?" Robert challenged. "Or would you have pushed her to terminate it, like you suggested during your marriage whenever she brought up having children?" Brian's hands curled into fists. "You know nothing about my marriage." "I know you valued success over everything else," Robert said quietly. "Even people who cared about you." Brian turned to leave, then looked back. "This isn't over. If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me." The next morning, Sarah brought the triplets to a medical facility for court-ordered DNA testing. The boys were confused by the process. "Why does the doctor need our spit?" Alexander asked as a technician gently swabbed the inside of his cheek. "It's to prove that Mr. Thompson is your daddy," Sarah explained simply. "Will he want to play with us after?" Benjamin asked hopefully. Sarah's heart ached at the question. "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll have to wait and see." Brian arrived 30 minutes later, entering through a separate door, as the court had arranged. He underwent the same testing procedure, avoiding eye contact with Sarah. Outside the facility, reporters waited with cameras. Sarah hurried the boys to her car, shielding them from the flashing lights. Back at her apartment, Sarah found a message from Jenkins Kim Digital Marketing's newest client. "Sarah, it's Mark from Porter Media. Given the recent publicity surrounding your personal situation, we're reconsidering our contract. Please call me back." Sarah closed her eyes in frustration. She had worked so hard to build her business, and now Brian's actions were threatening that too. Jessica arrived with lunch for everyone. "How did the testing go?" she asked. "The boys did great," Sarah replied, "but Porter Media is getting cold feet." Jessica sat down next to her friend. "Their loss. Our work speaks for itself. Plus, I've had 3 new inquiries this morning from companies impressed by how you've handled this situation." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Really? Really?" Jessica confirmed. "People respect strength and integrity. You've shown both." That afternoon, Walter Green called Sarah from the Thompson Technologies board. "Ms. Jenkins, I wanted to personally apologize for the company's lack of support over the past 2 years," he said. "Had we known about the children—" "It's not your responsibility, Mr. Green," Sarah interrupted. "Brian made his choices." "Nevertheless, the company wants to make things right," Walter continued. "We'd like to establish a trust for the children, separate from any court-ordered support from Brian personally." Sarah was stunned. "That's generous, but—" "It's the right thing to do," Walter insisted. "Also, we've been impressed with your marketing firm's portfolio. We'd like to discuss potential projects once the current situation stabilizes." After hanging up, Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions. For 2 years, she had struggled alone, making sacrifices to provide for her sons. Now suddenly, support was coming from unexpected places. Her phone rang again. It was Daniel. "The DNA results are already in," he said, his voice excited. "The lab expedited the process due to the high-profile nature of the case. Sarah, it's confirmed. The probability of paternity is 99.9% for all 3 boys." "Was there ever any doubt?" Sarah asked. "No, but now it's official," Daniel replied. "I've filed the paperwork for child support. Given Brian's income level, or what it was before all this, the amount will be substantial." Sarah looked at the triplets playing in the living room. "What happens now?" "Brian's attorney has requested a meeting to discuss visitation rights," Daniel said. "Are you open to that?" Sarah watched her sons, their faces so similar to Brian's. Despite everything, they deserved to know their father. "Yes," she said finally. but with strict supervision at first. I need to know he's stable enough to be around them." As Sarah ended the call, she didn't notice Christopher standing in the doorway. "Mommy," he asked quietly, "is Daddy coming to see us?" Sarah knelt down to his level. "Maybe soon, would you like that?" Christopher nodded. "Alexander says Daddy has a big house. Can we go there?" "We'll see," Sarah said, hugging him close. "Everything is changing right now, but I promise whatever happens, I'll always be here for you." Outside Sarah's apartment building, a black car was parked across the street. Inside, Brian Thompson watched the entrance, a folder of papers on the seat beside him. The paternity results had confirmed what he already knew in his heart the moment he saw the boys. They were his sons. And now he had to decide what kind of father he wanted to be, if he would fight Sarah for control or find a way to make amends for the 2 years he had missed. Brian remained in his car for another hour, watching Sarah's apartment building. He thought about going to the door, demanding to see his sons, but something stopped him. For perhaps the first time in his life, Brian Thompson hesitated. 2 months later, Brian sat in Alan Prescott's office, reviewing the prosecutor's latest offer. The walls of legal documents surrounding him represented how quickly his life had unraveled since Emma's birthday party. They're offering 6 years, reduced to 3 with good behavior, if you plead guilty to all charges, Alan explained, pointing to the document, plus full financial restitution to Thompson Technologies. Brian loosened his tie. His once perfect suits now hung loosely on his frame. 3 years in prison? That's their idea of a deal? "It's better than the 20 years you're facing if convicted at trial," Alan replied bluntly. "The evidence is overwhelming, Brian. Former associates are coming forward daily with new information." "What about my counteroffer? The one where I repay everything but serve no prison time?" Alan shook his head. "They rejected it immediately. You diverted over $12 million from the company to personal accounts. They want jail time." Brian stood and walked to the window. The Chicago skyline stretched before him, including the Thompson Technologies Tower where he was no longer welcome. "And the divorce?" Brian asked. "Not good," Alan admitted. "Melissa's attorneys are demanding full custody of Emma and half of your remaining assets. They've submitted documents claiming she suspected your financial improprieties but feared your reaction if she questioned you." "That's a lie," Brian snapped. "She enjoyed every penny I brought home. She never asked where it came from." "The court won't care," Alan said. "Between the criminal case and the divorce, you're looking at financial ruin unless we find a solution quickly." That afternoon, Brian attended his supervised visitation with the triplets. These visits had begun 3 weeks earlier, after lengthy negotiations between lawyers. They took place at a neutral location, a small playground near Sarah's apartment, with a court-appointed supervisor present. Brian sat awkwardly on a bench as Alexander, Benjamin, and Christopher played on the swings. He still struggled to tell them apart, which filled him with shame. "Higher, higher!" Alexander called as Brian pushed him on the swing. "Not too high," the supervisor cautioned from nearby. Benjamin watched shyly from the side while Christopher boldly climbed the jungle gym. Their different personalities were becoming clearer to Brian with each visit. "Mr. Thompson, you have 30 minutes left," the supervisor reminded him. Brian nodded and turned to Benjamin. "Would you like to build something in the sandbox?" To his surprise, Benjamin took his hand and led him to the sandbox. They began constructing a simple castle together. As they worked, Brian studied his son's face. The same cleft chin, the same eyebrows that Brian saw in the mirror every morning. "Is this good?" Benjamin asked quietly, placing a stick as a flag on their castle. "It's perfect," Brian replied, feeling an unexpected tightness in his throat. For a brief moment, everything else faded away. The criminal charges, the divorce, the lost company. There was only this small boy and the sand castle they built together. When Sarah arrived to pick up the boys, Brian noticed she looked different. Her hair was styled professionally and she wore a business suit. "How did it go?" she asked the supervisor. "Very well," the supervisor replied. Mr. Thompson was engaged and appropriate throughout the visit. Sarah nodded, then turned to Brian. The boys have been asking if they could see where you live. My place isn't really set up for children yet, Brian admitted. The mansion had been put on the market to cover his mounting legal fees. He now lived in a sparsely furnished condo downtown, a step down from his previous lifestyle but still luxurious by most standards. Maybe when it is, Sarah suggested, gathering the boys' belongings. As Brian watched them leave, Alexander looked back and waved. The simple gesture hit Brian with unexpected force. That evening, alone in his condo, Brian poured himself a drink and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The emptiness of the space echoed the emptiness he felt inside. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly feel the weight of everything he had lost: his company, his reputation, his marriage, and most painfully, the first 2 years of his sons' lives. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. Brian slid down against the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. After some time, he reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered. "Catherine," Brian said, his voice hoarse. "It's Brian." "Brian?" His sister sounded shocked. "I saw the news. Are you okay?" "No," he admitted. "I'm not. I've made a mess of everything." The next morning, Brian called Sarah and requested a meeting. Just the two of them. No lawyers. They met at a quiet coffee shop halfway between their homes. Sarah arrived first, choosing a table in the corner away from other customers. When Brian entered, she barely recognized him. The confident, borderline arrogant man she had been married to was gone. This Brian looked tired, humbled. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sitting across from her. "What's this about, Brian?" Sarah asked cautiously. Brian took a deep breath. "I want to apologize for everything. The way I treated you during our marriage, the divorce, not being there when you found out about the pregnancy." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation. "Why now?" "Yesterday during visitation, Benjamin and I built a sand castle," Brian said. "It was so simple, but it felt real, more real than anything I've accomplished in years." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've lost sight of what matters. I thought success meant money, status, power. I treated people like tools to achieve those things, including you." Sarah remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Brian said. "I don't deserve it. But I want to be part of my sons' lives, not to control them or use them, but to actually be their father, to do better with them than I did with everyone else." "Words are easy, Brian," Sarah replied finally. "You've always been good with words, I know," he acknowledged. "That's why I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking for a chance to prove it through actions." "What kind of actions?" "I'm considering taking the plea deal," Brian said. 3 years in prison instead of fighting the charges." Sarah looked surprised. "You'd go to prison voluntarily?" "It's the right thing to do," Brian said. "I did what they're accusing me of. I stole from my own company. Fighting it would just drag everyone through a messy public trial, including the kids." "What about custody, visitation?" Sarah asked. "I want reasonable visitation when I'm released," Brian replied. "But I won't fight you for custody. You're a good mother. The boys need stability, not a custody battle." Sarah sat back, processing his words. "I never thought I'd hear you say anything like this." "Neither did I," Brian admitted. "It took losing everything to see what I had." That night, Brian sat at his desk writing 4 separate letters, one each to Emma, Alexander, Benjamin, and Christopher. These weren't legal documents but personal messages they might read years later. In Emma's letter, he apologized for not being the father she deserved and promised to rebuild their relationship when he could. For each of the triplets, he wrote about their individual personalities as he had observed them, and his regret for missing the first 2 years of their lives. As he sealed the last envelope, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Alan Prescott. "Brian," Alan said when he answered. "The prosecutors called with a new demand." "What now?" Brian asked, suddenly tired. "They want you to testify against someone else involved in financial crimes at Thomson Technologies." "Who?" Brian asked, though he already suspected the answer. "James Wilson," Alan replied, "the chief accounting officer." Brian's blood ran cold. James had been following his direct orders. If Brian testified against him, it would implicate others in the company who had helped hide the financial misconduct. "They're offering to reduce your sentence to 18 months, Alan continued, "but only if you provide detailed testimony against Wilson and anyone else involved." Brian looked at the 4 sealed letters on his desk. 18 months would mean less time away from his children, but it would also mean betraying people who had only done what he asked them to do. "I need time to think," Brian told Alan, ending the call. He sat in silence, facing the most difficult moral choice of his life. Take the easier sentence and implicate others? Or accept full responsibility and serve more time? For the old Brian Thompson, the decision would have been simple: save himself at any cost. But the man sitting alone in the half-empty condo was no longer sure who he was or what he stood for. After a sleepless night, Brian called Alan Prescott at 6 in the morning. "I've made my decision," Brian said, his voice steady. "I won't testify against James Wilson or anyone else. They were following my instructions." "Are you sure?" Alan asked. "This means accepting the original plea deal. 3 years, with parole possible after 18 months. "I'm sure," Brian replied. "It's time I took responsibility for my own actions." 6 months after Emma's birthday party, Brian Thompson stood in a Chicago courtroom for his sentencing hearing. He wore a simple gray suit rather than his usual designer attire. The courtroom was packed with reporters, former colleagues, and curious onlookers. Sarah sat in the back row. She hadn't planned to attend, but felt compelled to witness this moment. The triplets were with her parents, who had moved to a small apartment in Chicago to help with childcare. "Mr. Thompson, before I pronounce sentence, you may address the court," Judge Eleanor Simmons said. Brian stood. "Your Honor, I am guilty of the crimes I've been charged with. I diverted company funds for personal use. I betrayed the trust of my employees, investors, and board members." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I built Thomson Technologies from nothing, and somewhere along the way, I began to believe that entitled me to take whatever I wanted. Success doesn't give anyone the right to steal or deceive. I accept full responsibility for my actions and the consequences that follow." Judge Simmons studied him for a moment. "Mr. Thompson, your statement shows a level of accountability that is rare in this courtroom. However, accountability doesn't erase consequences. Based on your guilty plea and the terms agreed upon, I sentence you to 3 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. The gavel struck with finality. As security officers approached to take Brian into custody, he glanced back and saw Sarah. Their eyes met briefly before he was led away. Outside the courthouse, Sarah avoided the reporters shouting questions. Her phone rang as she reached her car. "Sarah Jenkins," she answered. "Miss Jenkins, this is Gregory Parker from National Retail Group. I'm calling to confirm our decision to move forward with your proposal. We'd like Jenkins Kim Digital Marketing to handle our entire social media strategy for the next 2 years." Sarah gripped the steering wheel. "That's wonderful news, Mr. Parker. We're excited to work with you. Your presentation last week was exactly what we've been looking for," Gregory continued. "Fresh ideas, solid metrics. I was impressed with how you've grown your agency despite personal challenges." After the call ended, Sarah sat in her car, processing the news. This was their biggest contract ever, enough to hire more staff and move to a larger office space. After years of struggle, her professional life was finally thriving. That afternoon, Sarah met with Daniel Wilson to finalize the co-parenting arrangements that would take effect after Brian's eventual release. "Brian has signed all the documents," Daniel explained. "He'll have supervised visitation initially, then gradually increasing time with the boys if all goes well. And child support? Sarah asked. Daniel nodded. The court approved the amount we requested. It's substantial, even with Brian's reduced assets. The boys will be financially secure. I never wanted his money, Sarah said. Just his acknowledgement and support. You've gotten both, Daniel pointed out. Brian could have dragged this out for years. Instead, he's accepted every term we proposed. Later that week, Melissa finalized her divorce from Brian in a private hearing. She emerged from the courthouse to find reporters waiting. "Melissa, how does it feel to be single again?" one shouted. "Will you keep the Thompson name?" asked another. Melissa adjusted her sunglasses. "I'm focused on the future, not the past. Emma and I are beginning a new chapter." Her attorney, Catherine Reed, guided her through the crowd to a waiting car. "You handled that perfectly," Catherine said once they were inside. "Very dignified." "I've been practicing," Melissa replied. "My publisher wants me to do a 10-city book tour when Standing on My Own comes out next month." "How much of the book discusses Brian?" Catherine asked. "Enough to be honest, not enough to be vindictive," Melissa explained. "It's really about financial independence for women, how to protect yourself, how to build your own safety net." At Thompson Technologies headquarters, Rebecca Chen stood before a room of employees and investors behind her. A screen displayed the company's new ethics protocols. 6 months ago, Thompson Technologies faced a crisis of leadership and trust, Rebecca began. "Today, I'm proud to announce our complete restructuring is finished. Our new transparency measures exceed industry standards." Robert Martinez, now the company's COO, joined her at the podium. "Our stock price has recovered to pre-scandal levels," he added. "And our new partnership with West Coast Tech will provide stability and growth opportunities." Afterward, Robert checked his watch. "I need to leave early today," he told Rebecca. "I have somewhere important to be." 2 hours later, Robert sat across from Brian Thompson in the visiting room of the federal prison. Brian wore a khaki prison uniform, a stark contrast to the expensive suits he once favored. "You look well," Robert said, trying to ease the tension. "Prison food will help you lose weight," Brian replied with a slight smile. "How's the company?" "Recovering," Robert said. "Rebecca is doing a good job." They sat in awkward silence for a moment. "Why are you here, Robert?" Brian finally asked. "I've been asking myself that same question," Robert admitted. "I guess I wanted to see if the change I saw in court was real." Brian looked down at his hands. "I had a lot of time to think before sentencing about how things went so wrong." "When did it start?" Robert asked. "The embezzlement?" "Small amounts at first, 3 years ago," Brian said. "The company was doing well, but I wanted more, needed more to maintain the lifestyle. Then it became easy. Too easy." "I saw the warning signs," Robert said quietly. "We all did. But you had us convinced you could do no wrong." "That was my greatest skill," Brian acknowledged. "Convincing people to see what I wanted them to see." As their visit ended, Robert stood to leave. "Sarah's doing well, by the way. Her agency landed the national retail account." A genuine smile crossed Brian's face. "Good for her. She deserves it." "The boys ask about you," Robert added. "Sarah shows them your pictures, tells them their father is away for work." Brian's eyes glistened. "I don't deserve her kindness." "No," Robert agreed, "but those boys deserve to know their father. The real one, not the man you pretended to be." That evening, Sarah sat on the floor of her living room playing with the triplets. They had grown so much in the past 6 months, developing distinct personalities despite their identical appearances. The doorbell rang, and Sarah opened it to find a delivery person holding a package. "Sarah Jenkins?" he asked. "Sign here, please." Inside the package was a handwritten letter from Brian and 3 small stuffed animals: a lion, a bear, and an elephant. The letter was simple and direct. "Sarah, I know words mean little after everything that's happened. I can only say I'm sorry and promise to be better. Please give these to the boys. During our visits, I noticed Alexander likes lions, Benjamin likes bears, and Christopher prefers elephants. It's not much, but I want them to know I see them as individuals, not just as my sons. Thank you for your kindness in keeping me in their lives. Despite everything, Brian, Sarah placed the stuffed animals on the boys' beds, then sat down to read the letter again. There was no manipulation in these words, no hidden agenda, just a simple acknowledgement and gratitude. Her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. "Sarah Jenkins," she answered. "Ms. Jenkins, this is Rebecca Chen, CEO of Thompson Technologies." Sarah straightened. "Ms. Chen, what can I do for you?" "I'll be direct," Rebecca said. "Our marketing team needs fresh ideas for our rebranding effort. Robert Martinez spoke highly of your firm's work. We'd like to discuss hiring Jenkins Kim for the project." Sarah was momentarily speechless. The company that had once been Brian's was now reaching out to her. "I'd be happy to meet and discuss possibilities," Sarah finally replied. "Excellent. And to be clear, this has nothing to do with Brian or the past," Rebecca added. "This is purely a business decision based on your firm's quality of work." After hanging up, Sarah looked at the family photos on her wall, pictures of her with the triplets at the park, at their 3rd birthday celebration, at the zoo. Despite everything, they were happy. They were thriving. The doorbell rang again. This time, it was Robert. "Sorry to stop by unannounced," he said. "I was in the neighborhood." Sarah invited him in. "I just got off the phone with Rebecca Chen." Robert smiled. "I might have suggested your firm to her, but the decision was hers." They sat at the kitchen table while the boys played in the next room. "I visited Brian today," Robert said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "How is he?" "Different," Robert replied. "The arrogance is gone. He asked about you and the boys." "He sent them gifts," Sarah said, gesturing to the letter. "Nothing expensive, just stuffed animals he knew they'd each like." Robert nodded. "Maybe people can change." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "Time will tell." As Robert prepared to leave, Christopher ran into the kitchen clutching his new elephant. "Uncle Robert," he shouted, "look what Daddy sent me." "That's a great elephant," Robert said, kneeling to the boy's level. "Did you see my daddy?" Christopher asked innocently. Robert glanced at Sarah, who nodded slightly. "Yes, I did," Robert told the boy, "and he said to tell you he loves you very much." "When is he coming home?" Christopher asked. Sarah joined them, putting her arm around her son. "Not for a while. But when he does, I think he'll be a different daddy than he was before. A better one." That night, after putting the boys to bed, Sarah read Brian's letter one more time before placing it in a drawer. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges with co-parenting, with explaining to the boys why their father was in prison, with balancing her growing business and family responsibilities. But for the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of closure, not because everything was resolved, it wasn't, but because everyone involved was finally facing reality with honesty instead of deception. 18 months passed, transforming lives in ways none of them could have predicted. On a bright Tuesday morning, Sarah sat in the conference room of Jenkins Kim Digital Marketing's downtown Chicago office. The wall-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city skyline, including the Thompson Technologies Tower in the distance. The Thompson Technologies campaign exceeded all engagement metrics, Jessica explained to their team of 12 employees. Their customer trust ratings are up 60% since we began the rebranding. Sarah nodded, pride evident in her expression. What had started as a small two-person operation was now one of Chicago's most respected boutique marketing firms. "Great work, everyone," Sarah said. "Let's move on to the National Retail Group proposal." After the meeting, Sarah checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Daniel Wilson and a text message. "Call me ASAP. Good news." Sarah closed her office door and dialed Daniel's number. "I just heard from the correctional facility," Daniel said when he answered. "Brian's early release was approved. He'll be out next Tuesday." Sarah sat down at her desk. "So soon? I thought the parole hearing was next month." "His behavior has been exemplary," Daniel explained. "Combined with prison overcrowding, They expedited the process. "Have you told him about the party?" Sarah asked. "Yes. He's grateful you're willing to include him." Sarah ended the call and looked at the photo on her desk. The triplets, now 4 years old, playing at the park. Next week was their birthday, and for the first time, Brian would be there to celebrate with them. Her phone buzzed with another call, Robert Martinez. "Are we still on for dinner tonight?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah smiled. "My mother is watching the boys." "I just heard about Brian's release," Robert said. "How do you feel about that?" "Ready, I think," Sarah replied. "The boys are excited. They've been counting down the days since I told them their father was coming home." That afternoon, Sarah picked up the triplets from preschool. They raced toward her, backpacks bouncing. "Mommy, Mommy," Alexander called. "I made a space rocket in art class." "I made a dinosaur," Christopher added, not to be outdone. Benjamin, still the quietest of the three, simply took Sarah's hand and smiled up at her. "Guess what?" Sarah said as they walked to the car. "I have some special news. Daddy is coming home next week just in time for your birthday." "Really?" Alexander's eyes widened. "Will he stay at our house?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah explained. "Daddy will have his own apartment, but he'll visit often and sometimes you'll stay with him." "Will Emma be there too?" Christopher asked. "For the birthday party, yes," Sarah confirmed. "Emma and Melissa will come to celebrate with us." The relationship between Sarah and Melissa had evolved over the past year into a cautious friendship. Their children were siblings, and both women recognized the importance of maintaining a civil connection. Across town, Melissa Thompson sat in a television studio, preparing for an interview about her best-selling book, Standing on My Own, A Guide to Financial Independence for Women. "We're on in 5 minutes, Mrs. Thompson," a production assistant informed her. "It's Ms. Jenkins now, actually," Melissa corrected gently. She had recently reverted to her maiden name, part of her journey to reclaim her identity. The interview went smoothly, with Melissa discussing how her experience with Brian had inspired her to educate women about financial security. "When my marriage ended, I realized how dependent I had become," Melissa explained to the host. "My book teaches women to maintain financial independence regardless of their relationship status." After the interview, Melissa picked up Emma, now nearly 3, from her sister's home. "Mommy," Emma called, running toward her. "I drew a picture of you." Melissa knelt to examine the crayon drawing. "It's beautiful, sweetie. Should we put it on the refrigerator at home?" "Yes. And can we send one to Daddy too?" "Of course," Melissa said. "We'll see Daddy next week at your brother's birthday party, remember?" Emma nodded. "Daddy has 3 boys and 1 girl." "That's right," Melissa agreed, impressed by her daughter's understanding of their complex family situation. The next day, Brian Thompson sat across from his prison counselor for their final session. The khaki uniform that had once felt so foreign now fit like a second skin. "You've made remarkable progress, Brian," the counselor observed. "Your anger management completion, the financial literacy courses you've taught other inmates. You're leaving here a different man than the one who arrived." Brian nodded. "Prison has a way of stripping away pretense. All the status, the power. None of it matters in here. You're forced to face who you really are." "And who is that?" the counselor asked. "A man who made terrible mistakes," Brian replied. "A father who nearly lost the chance to know his children, someone who's trying to do better." "Your release is scheduled for Tuesday," the counselor reminded him. "Have you arranged housing?" "Yes, a small apartment not far from Sarah's place. I want to be close to the boys." "And work?" "A friend from college is giving me a position at his technology consulting firm," Brian explained. "Entry level, but it's a start." The day of Brian's release arrived with little fanfare. He changed into civilian clothes, simple jeans and a button-down shirt provided by the prison release program. A staff member handed him a plastic bag containing his personal effects, a wallet, watch, and phone that seemed like artifacts from another life. "Your ride is waiting outside, Mr. Thompson," the staff member informed him. Brian expected a taxi. Instead, he found Robert Martinez leaning against a black sedan. "Robert," Brian said, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you." "Sarah asked me to pick you up," Robert explained. "She thought it might be easier than a taxi." The ride to Brian's new apartment was initially awkward. Two men who had once been close now separated by betrayal and redemption. "How are the boys?" Brian finally asked. "Growing fast," Robert replied. "Christopher is the troublemaker. Alexander is the leader. Benjamin is the thinker." Brian smiled. "And Sarah? Are you two?" "We're taking things slowly," Robert admitted. "But yes, we've been seeing each other for about 6 months." Brian nodded. "She deserves to be happy. You both do." When they arrived at the apartment building, Brian was surprised by its quality. He had expected something more basic. "Sarah found this place," Robert explained. "She wanted to make sure it was in a good neighborhood for when the boys visit." The apartment was small but comfortable, already furnished with basics. On the kitchen counter sat a welcome basket with groceries and a note from Sarah. "The boys are excited to see you tomorrow 4 p.m. at our place. No gifts necessary, just you." The next day, Brian stood nervously outside Sarah's apartment door, empty-handed despite the note. He couldn't arrive at his son's birthday party without gifts. Sarah opened the door, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. She was more confident, more settled in herself than he remembered. "You look well," she said finally, stepping aside to let him in. "So do you," Brian replied. "Thank you for including me today." The apartment was decorated with balloons and streamers. A homemade banner read, "Happy 4th birthday, Alexander, Benjamin, and Christopher." The contrast with Emma's elaborate first birthday party wasn't lost on Brian. The triplets played with Emma in the living room under the watchful eye of Sarah's parents. When they spotted Brian, all 3 boys ran toward him. "Daddy!" they shouted in unison. Brian knelt to their level, his throat tight with emotion. "Happy birthday, boys!" He presented them with 3 small gift bags, each containing a carefully chosen book based on their interests. For Alexander, a book about rockets. For Christopher, dinosaurs. For Benjamin, animals. Melissa arrived shortly after, greeting Brian with a polite nod. "You're looking well, Brian." "Thanks," he replied. "Your book is doing great. I saw the reviews." "You've read it?" Melissa seemed surprised. "The prison library had a copy," Brian explained. "It's good. Honest." The party was simple. Cake, ice cream, and games in the apartment. No photographers, no elaborate entertainment, no society guests, just family celebrating together. As the children played, the adults gathered in the kitchen. The tension was palpable but civil. "Thompson Technologies is doing well under Rebecca's leadership," Robert reported. "Stock prices are at an all-time high." "I'm glad," Brian said sincerely. "The employees deserve that stability." Sarah brought out coffee for everyone. "Brian, the boys have been asking if they can visit your apartment soon." "Any time," Brian replied eagerly. "It's not much, but I set up a small bedroom for them." As the party continued, Brian found himself helping clean up spilled juice, tying balloons, and taking photos of the children. Simple, ordinary tasks that now felt like privileges. When it was time to leave, he hugged each of his sons goodbye. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Alexander asked. "Not tomorrow," Brian explained, "but Saturday. We can go to the park if your mom says it's okay." Sarah nodded. "That sounds good. 2 hours at the park, then back here for dinner." Outside Sarah's building, Brian paused to look up at her apartment windows. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Trust would take years to rebuild. But for the first time, he felt genuine hope. Not for regaining what he'd lost, but for building something new and authentic. As he walked toward the bus stop, another new experience for the former CEO, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "The boys are already talking about Saturday. Thank you for being there today. They need their father." Brian typed his reply carefully. I'm working on a design for educational software that might help Alexander with his reading difficulties. Would you look at it sometime? I value your opinion." Her response came quickly. "I'd be happy to. Bring it Saturday." Brian smiled as he boarded the bus. His old life had been built on appearances, acquisitions, and power. His new life would be built on humility, genuine connection, and service to others, starting with his children. It wasn't the ending he had envisioned for himself. It was better, because for the first time, it was real. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.